Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm John Kiriakou here with Michelle Whitty. It's a happy day today at the White House now that the July Consumer Price Index has been released, showing that inflation has fallen from 9.5% to 8.5%. I'm joking, of course, but the White House is optimistic that the worst is behind us and that inflation will continue to fall as job growth accelerates and we get closer and closer to the midterm elections. And yesterday was a day of quiet primary elections in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Vermont, and has shown some still fascinating results. There's no doubt that when it comes time for the midterm elections, voters are going to have clear choices between conservative and progressive candidates, between those who want a continuation of Donald Trump's legacy and those who don't. We're joined by Steve Grumbind. Steve is founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Welcome back, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Oh, we love having you on, Steve. And, this is one of those perfect days where there's a good mix of economic news and political news. You're the perfect person. Let's start with inflation. I've been very intrigued by the media reaction today to this drop in inflation. The government announced this morning that it had fallen to 8.5% for July. That's still pretty high, though, historically. But then I saw comparisons to other countries. It kind of made me laugh. One headline that I saw this morning was, "You think 8% inflation is high? Try 80%. That was an article about the Turkish economy. But 8.5% inflation is still rough on a lot of Americans, especially when so many Americans are still earning minimum wage that hasn't been raised in many years, or wages that keep them in poverty. So I guess my first question to you is, do you think we're headed in the right direction? Is this an anomaly, or is inflation really beginning to come down?
Well, we saw fuel prices go down. I'm not sure of all the reasons that suddenly brought these forward. I mean, remember, they set these prices forward, right? So, the oil production at the wholesale level, these things have been speculated on and procured. The contracts were written last year for this year kind of thing.
Right.
So these prices and stuff are these are the retail prices, and they have dropped. I mean, they've dropped significantly here in my own hometown. I mean, we've got in the order of 50 cents drop in the cost of fuel. So I imagine that has had some impact on the overall inflation numbers. Mm-hmm. However, I think it's really important to note that while this is happening, the Fed is still actively hiking up interest rates. Right. And hiking up interest rates is a monetarist approach to how you deal with inflation. They don't have any other tools at the Fed really to use than managing interest rates, which then in turn serves to kind of kill the economy, and by extension, to go with Larry Summers, also kills jobs. Mm-hmm. So you've kind of got this weird, it's like a dichotomy, like two very ironic worlds trying to merge together here, where on one hand, we're seeing an uptick in jobs, and I'll talk about that in a second, but we're also seeing the desires of the inflationistas at the Fed to try to create unemployment. This is standard. This is what they did during the Volcker era of the 70s during the OPEC crisis, and they figured they'll just forklift that whole strategy forward here today. Now, why is this a big deal? If you remember, not even a year ago, we were reading articles about the Great Resignation. Mm-hmm. We're reading articles about people checking out of the workforce altogether. We're not just talking about people that are involuntarily unemployed. We're talking about people that made a different decision in life. They either paid off some debt, right. They changed things, they bought a tiny house, whatever it is that they did something different. They made decisions that were different. And so what you've seen, and this will play into some of the other stuff we may talk about through this conversation, is that they have literally created a situation where there's no money being spent into the economy. So therefore, it's putting the economy on the backs of people to get credit, to fill the void that federal spending once was filling, to fill that back up with bank credit and credit card debt and other forms of debt to backfill the poverty of money, the lack of money. And I think that right there is kind of playing into this as well. So people aren't necessarily going back to work because they want to, because they've been unemployed, desperate to go back to work. Many of these people are going back to work out of necessity because of the austerity baked into the economy. So to me, this is all a very, very bad thing. I mean, obviously, inflation going down, good thing, right?
Sure.
But I think everybody, to a fault, would say, I'd rather pay a little teeny bit more in prices than have a whole bunch of unemployed people running around, involuntarily unemployed people. Now, people choose to be unemployed, that's a different story. But involuntary, nah, that's a cruel, blunt instrument used to try to discipline labor to bring about these conditions that will, quote unquote, bring down inflation. I think it's important, and you can cut me off if you need to, but I want to make this point.
Yeah, please do.
There are different flavors of inflation, right? If you've got a supply chain issue, invest in attacking the supply chain issue. If you've got an issue of high gas prices, then address your high fuel prices. Maybe stop domestic exports of fuel. Maybe, put price caps on, do whatever, right? But what do? It's kind of like this weird sideways attack. If we kill everyone's ability to make decisions for themselves, make their lives just a little bit more tenuous because the worker has too much power right now, and we don't like that. Well, now all of a sudden we can tame labor by literally creating the conditions that force them to do things that they probably wouldn't otherwise do if given a choice. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing a lot of really, really low wage jobs, poor jobs, garbage jobs, if you will, that people are having to pull 2 and 3 of to stay afloat now. If you watch some of the work Jordan Chariton's done as he's gone into local communities, you see that all is not well out in the world. I mean, people are literally trying to figure out where they're going to live. Homelessness is horrible. So there's a lot of things that this exuberance about a slight dip in inflation is really geared to hide and cover.
Right.
And I think they did a number on that yesterday by raiding Donald Trump's Mar A Lago location as well. I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors heading into November. And I think that's really, what is it that they're trying to distract us from? This absolute onslaught that I think we're going to sadly see from Republicans. I think the rise of the Trumpists are going to take advantage of this exact situation that we're talking about right here with the inflation and the tepid response to it. And they're gonna capitalize on that. They're going to use it, and they're going to use Trump as a martyr, and that'll be the story.
Yeah, I suspect that you're right. I have kind of a follow-up question for you, too. Do you expect the administration to be able to, or even willing to, do something about wages to help lift people out of poverty? Or do you think that in the interest of, and I'm using air quotes here, fighting inflation, they're going to continue to try to keep wages down?
You know what? If you just simply go by a standard MBA textbook, anything that causes costs to rise within a business are passed on to the consumer in terms of price hikes. So as it stands right now, we haven't taken on big business. We haven't addressed corporate practices. We haven't addressed the threshold between profit sharing going up to the executive versus sharing it amongst the workers who bring about that surplus. So I think anything fundamental that is going to be changed here, it's not going to happen from the White House. They believe fundamentally in free markets. Mm-hmm. They fundamentally believe in letting business dictate those terms. They fundamentally believe that government is there merely to protect them and to provide markets for them to do their bit. They don't believe their job is to really regulate. I don't know how this deregulation I guess we can look at Reagan, but I think this goes back further than Reagan. I think this was always the Milton Friedman school of thought that kind of fed the the Schiffs of the Peter Schiffs of the world, Peter Schiffs of the world, and the entire Reagan revolution that kind of was carried forward by Bill Clinton and and Barack Obama, quite frankly, and we've seen it with Trump, and now we see it with Biden. I don't think that that's changing until we make a decision that it changes. I think that you're going to just see this laissez-faire approach to everything that they do. This is the problem. This is why I said all that. Everything that they do is with the hope and prayer that the good graces of big business decide to take these measures and then say, okay, we will give back to the community. But that's not how they're wired to work. It's just simply not. You need regulatory action. You need antitrust action. You need, to totally bust up the stranglehold patent laws have, and on and on and on. These are ways that you bring down inflation. My God, can you imagine the kind of inflation reduction we'd have if we simply limited the power that corporations use with patents? Just that alone would absolutely drop the bottom out of the price structure. We would have real low prices right there. That would be truly momentous.
Wow.
We're not going to see it, though, bottom line. We're not going to see it. Not at all.
Hey, Steve, can I ask you, I wanted to ask you kind of a wonky question, but it's something that caught my eye. And it's this decision by a major credit score provider, Vantage Score Solutions, not to factor medical debts in collections into how it calculates credit scores. And it's not the first to do this. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, they had already decided they were going to exclude most medical collections debt from their scores. And so Vantage Score is just going a little further and saying we're not going to look at any medical debt in collections. And so, part of this sounds good, right? The Vantage Score said, look, these debts aren't good at predicting a person's likelihood of repaying other debts. And so this decision means that people with medical debt in collections could see their credit scores increase by up to 20 points, which is good, I guess, if in the world right now you are trying to get a car loan or get a credit card with a better rate or get an apartment, right? Because renting an apartment means they have to look at your credit score. But it also, I think, raises some concerning issues, which is how normalized this predation by the healthcare industry has become, right? That so many millions of people have medical debt in collections that we can't even treat it as an anomaly anymore, right? That seems pretty horrifying, right? Having huge medical bills in collections is just normal now, so we'll ignore it. And the other thing that remains troubling to me is just how keen some of these big banks are to get people to take out lines of credit. I think it was just last week I noticed a story about banks spending a whole bunch on marketing their credit cards to people. They are, of course, not doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. And so, I wanted to ask your thoughts on this, right? Your thoughts on what it means to have these credit scores deciding that they're just going to not even pay attention to this medical debt that more and more Americans are carrying around, and just why all of these companies seem so eager to pave the way for Americans to get access to more and more credit.
Boy, oh boy, you are more insightful than I think you realize. So if you think about, this is an ongoing mantra that every time you have me on your show, you'll hear me talk about. Neoliberalism literally depletes the public space and enhances the private space. When the private space is fully bloated and completely saturated, they go and they start peeling away new bits of the public space to create new markets that they predate upon. Well, what is it that a credit card company needs to do? I mean, the bottom line is, let's say they give you $50 of credit, but they know they're going to get $75 back for getting you to take out that $50 purchase. All right. To them, if they make $51, they've won because they haven't done anything. They literally haven't done anything. They've literally, it's no big deal. So they roll the numbers and they figure that the amount of people that will actually follow through good on their debt makes it a worthwhile venture to allow people who are already over their heads in debt have access to even more debt. This is a different play on what they did in the housing market back in the great financial crisis that we went through in 08 and 09. And it's very similar tactic. So what they've done is they realized that if the federal government is going to cut down and reduce the deficit, which is all the rage right now with this Inflation Reduction Act, they're touting their $300 and some odd billion in deficit reduction. This is a big deal. So deficit reduction really nets out to we've taken more money out of the economy through taxation and lower spending than we've put back into it. And so they recognize that, and that means they've got to backfill the bathtub of the economy with something. And it's either going to be in terms of us exporting things. Well, we know that we're a net importing nation, so that's not going to really be the deal. So it leaves us with private credit. Well, if you're already maxed out because your medical debt is killing you, that's a lot of money that these credit card companies are leaving on the table for people that they don't really care necessarily if all of them pay their debt back. They just care that enough of them do it to push them over the edge to keep them growing, because capitalism desires growth. It needs to show more growth. If you read, there's a book by Brett Scott, the great author from South African author, writes out of England. He wrote a book here recently called Cloud Money. Please get it. It's one of the best books I've ever read in my life. And he talks about the convergence of payment systems, like all these different, Paycor, PayPal, Cash App, all these different, fintech type deals that provide access to credit cards. And this is all part of a larger network of people. They don't even have many people working for them. They're largely a server farm with an AI voice that says, "Hi, would you like to talk to Tina?" And all of a sudden some computer named Tina starts talking to you, or Biff or Billy or Joey or whoever. And they don't have anybody there, but they're skimming money off of each transaction. And so as they continue to spread this out through fintech, through like Facebook Pay and all these different pays, they're all getting a piece of the action. This is a new industry, it's not new, but it's a burgeoning one. And it's all part of this credit expansion, knowing full well that the government itself is going to retrench, pull back, go into deficit reduction mode. And, for those folks that don't understand, deficit reduction is austerity, and austerity is murder. And, this is going to hurt the people that are least capable of dealing with it. But they're predating, once again, that what they're doing is, on one hand, it sounds good, because when you're hurting and you're drowning and all of a sudden you realize the back tire on your car is bald and it's about to blow, and if you don't get that tire replaced, you're going to have a blowout and you can't get to work. But you don't have enough money. So now all of a sudden you've got access to credit and you can get a new tire. That's wonderful. These are the times that credit should be there, right? But what they're doing is really it's just more of the same retrenchment and credit expansion that you expect during these times. This is a business model, and it is straight out of the neoliberal playbook. So I think we should get rid of all the credit agencies, period. I think it should be illegal for apartment renters to have to give their credit score or anything else. I think all these things really, really are detrimental to society. So I come at it from an entirely farther perspective than where we're at. But just looking at it for where it is, I think it's pretty clear that this is predatory, and I think you nailed it when you gave your explanation.
That book looks really good, by the way. I'm gonna go check that out.
Steve, he's the greatest.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, I was just going to say Brett Scott is one of my heroes. There's two people in the world that I mean, there's a lot of people I value and respect and revere, but there's two people in particular that I think are writing game-changing materials right here, right now, that I think everybody should get behind. Number one is Brett Scott in terms of the fintech side, but also Jason Hickel, who's looking at degrowth and global eco-socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Two guys that are really, really powerful. I've had both of them on the Macro and Cheese podcast. In fact, this Saturday's podcast will be with Jason Hickel as well. Just a guy that every time he speaks, everything that comes out of his mouth, I'm just nodding. And that doesn't happen very often. So great guy.
Amen. I wanted to ask you about some of these primaries yesterday. Wisconsin Republicans nominated a pro-Trump, election-denying real estate billionaire for governor. The Democrats nominated the progressive black lieutenant governor for the U.S. Senate seat. There are real ideological choices that are going to be presented to voters in Wisconsin in November. In Minnesota, get this, Representative Ilhan Omar barely won by the skin of her teeth, 50-48, against a pro-police conservative Democrat. And again, there was a real ideological choice in that race. It seems like Democrats and Republicans are farther and farther apart ideologically. What do you think that means for purple states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and others as we get closer to the midterms?
Well, I'm glad you said that. I live in one of those purple states, Pennsylvania to be exact. And we have a clown named Doug Mastriano, who's running for governor. And these are the MAGAs. These are the folks that are literally openly campaigning against woke culture. They're not, when I say this, I'm not talking about they're fighting the other candidate. They're literally talking about the people. Yeah. They're like talking about the people being bad, the people that live in their district. They're not even, it's naked hatred. Okay. So I don't see a world of difference on the economic front with these two groups. I mean, they're both solidly neoliberal, but you nailed it. There's an ideological proclivity. I have a very good friend who was my former best man at my first wedding, whose wife just said, hey, I've had enough of this woke culture. I'm moving to Tennessee. And she literally picked up and left with her kid and went to Tennessee, waiting for him to follow if he chooses to. Because they just want to be away from woke culture. Wow. This woke thing is going to penetrate at the school board meetings. It's going to penetrate at your local grocery store. It's going to be everywhere you go, at the football games, your kids' high school games, whatever. This is becoming citizen against citizen. And it's really ugly. I mean, like, you know, it used to be that you would sit there in a room with people and you knew that everybody was different. And you just said, we're just not going to talk about those things. And you just sort of had a good time watching the ball game or doing whatever. It's getting different, right? It really is. So I think that you watch every time these partisans get excited about doing what they did in Mar A Lago. I mean, look, I am no Trump supporter. I think the man's a criminal even before he became president, right? I think it's just a garbage human being. But I think all these suckers are garbage human beings. And I look at the motives and I look at what they stand for. And it's very, very hard to see any of them taking the quote unquote moral high ground as you see the corruption just oozing all over them, right? And so when one corrupt person starts talking about the corruption of another corrupt person, it's very hard to take it seriously. So what does it do? It nets out to my team versus your team. And everything else is irrelevant. So I really see very, very negative times coming up, especially, you know, I don't take electoral politics nearly as seriously as some do. I see it largely as organized community theater. But in reality, let's just suggest that even if it is theater, just like sitcoms have an impact over our conversations in the lunchroom, these political situations have direct impact on how we see our next door neighbors and how we treat the kids in school and how we look at one another. And I think this is really, really very, very dark times for society. Beyond just the economic space, I think they're creating a scenario where we're left with a bunch of people that are totally armed to the gills and are angry as hell Some of it legitimate. I mean, because let's be fair, the Democrats create new fascists every day. They do something stupid.
Yeah, sure.
And the flip side is that the Republicans have a very simple job. Our job is to repeal anything that sounds woke. Our job is to literally stand pat for the way it used to be, whatever that is. And so it's a pretty easy thing to defend. They're not really trying to change anything. They're just trying to keep whites at the top of the food chain. Mm-hmm. And really not just whites, but moneyed interest at the top of the food chain to keep the status quo. And Joe Biden is the perfect president for them, ironically. But the difference is you can see this, and I think this kind of wraps up all that we've talked about, is that it's not the finance. They all see the same stuff, basically. Mm-hmm. It really comes down to the social impact, and that's how they divide us, is through the social spaces that, you know, my rights, my special needs, my this, my that, all of which are valid things to concern ourselves with, but they're using them as a means of balkanizing us against each other and shattering any sense of class unity, class struggle, class anything.
Yeah.
And it is really, really going to have deleterious effects on society long term, long term, way longer than just this moment.
Vermont, of all places, had a fascinating race yesterday. Nobody's paid any attention to Vermont in this electoral season. An anti-war solar energy worker and Iraq war veteran in Vermont won the Republican nomination for the U.S. House. He's not a Republican. He's an independent. He said he ran as a Republican because he wanted to upend a broken system that gives voters no choices. And he's considering now declining the nomination, but he doesn't want the Republican Party to pick his replacement. It seems to me, and I think this is just one example, that the country is ready for third parties, maybe several different third parties. People are upset with the Republicans. They're equally upset with the Democrats. More people identify as independents than at any other time in American history. What do you think? Do you think that what we're seeing could lead to a change, a real change in electoral politics? Or is this one of these cyclical things that we go through every once in a while?
You know, I think we're always mentally and emotionally ready for a third party. I think there's always been third party, fourth party hunger. And going back to the time of Lincoln, I mean, there's been very few insurgent parties that have actually come out of this. I mean, I think the Whig Party and really Lincoln was the last time anything like this really happened.
That's exactly right.
So if you think about the lay of the land, nothing's fundamentally changed there either, right? You still require, sadly, Democrats and Republicans to pass laws that allow various things to occur. And what have we seen the last several elections? We've seen Democrats literally go to the ends of the earth to block Green Party candidates. Not so much Republicans fighting off libertarians, but definitely Democrats fighting off Greens and the like.
Yes.
And I never missed the opportunity to call Addy Barkin out. He has a tweet out there. All you got to do is search him cheering on the fact that the Democrats kept the Greens off the ballot.
Yeah.
Literally, this is the level of celebration they have. So the idea that Democrats are going to suddenly lay down their weapons and say, yes, we want to have ranked choice voting. Yes, we want to do this. I think you got to understand that we may be ready for it, but you've got to have laws on the books. And there's only 20 some states that even have the ability to do a referendum or any of these kind of line item things. Mm-hmm. Okay. We don't have 50 states that can do this. So it's a great idea. I've been very much supportive of various third party efforts throughout. I'm at the point there now where I have watched the third parties know the truth of something, but for personal reasons or whatever, decide to kind of do something really boneheaded and stupid. And one of them in particular, I won't even mention the party because I don't want to get into poop flinging. But when you understand MMT and the things that I've talked about, there's absolutely nothing I've talked about anybody hears me talking that says, "Oh, that guy, he's pro-capitalist," they're full of shit. Full of poopy pee. Sorry, I self-censored there, guys. Anyway, but they're not living in reality. They're not telling the truth. And so to me, I say, look, the reason why Democrats, not the people elected, but the rank and file, aren't able to ask for bigger and better and real change, because they don't understand that real change is even possible. Okay.
Yeah.
When the third party starts slipping into that realm as well and create the fact that, yeah, we're angry at those guys. Those guys are bad. Yeah, we all know that, right? They stink. But what are you offering that's different? It doesn't matter to hear a bunch of policies, because everybody's got great ideas. It's not a matter of great ideas. Can you make them happen?
Yeah, that's right.
And to me, this is where third party politics is kind of a dead end at this moment, for me anyway. I see us needing to be more Occupy Wall Street, and maybe out of an OWS 2.0, a party comes out with street cred from organizing the people. For all these independents out there, it's amazing how few of them are actually willing to roll up their sleeves and be a part of the dirty work that it takes to build institutions, parallel institutions. Everybody's caught up in whatever they're going to binge watch on Netflix.
Yeah.
They're not willing to lay it on the line. And I'm telling you, this is a guy who's been actively trying for a long time. And I admit that maybe I'm just not the right guy for those kinds of things. Maybe it's somebody else, and that's fine. But I have not seen anyone that has that understanding. They get caught up in the weeds and silly stuff, things that are niche and fringe.
You go to the 2016 Libertarian Party convention, for example, where one guy went up to give a speech, and during the course of the speech took off all of his clothes until he was standing there butt naked and had to be taken out by the police. I mean, that's one of the reasons why so many Americans don't take third parties terribly seriously. We're going to have to leave it there as we're out of time. We were joined by Steve Grumbine. Steve, thanks for joining us. Steve is the founder and the CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. Excuse me. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. You're listening to Political Misfits right here on Radio Sputnik. We're going to take a short break and come right back.